The lie isn't that you're too busy. The lie is that you could fix it anytime. You solve problems for a living. You see patterns other people miss. You intervene before things collapse. Think about that for a moment. Not the surface level version of it, not the polite version, the actual version. You're a person who has built things, real things. You made decisions under pressure that most people will never face. You have looked at failing systems, broken teams, bad numbers, and you have acted decisively, repeatedly. That's not narrative, that's your track record. And yet, there's one system you keep deferring, one set of numbers you haven't looked at with the same rigor, one area where your diagnostic precision, the thing that made you successful, goes quiet. Your body. And the reason you haven't acted isn't because you lack information. It isn't because you lack resources. And it isn't because you lack the time. It's because you've written a very good story about why right now isn't the moment. The longer you repeat the story, the more it becomes identity. And once the story becomes identity, evidence stop mattering. This is Iron Suits, where strength wears a crown. I am your host, Marwan Killu. Let's look at the language, not the behavior, the language. Because high-performing people don't lie crudely. They construct. They use precision, nuance, and intelligence to build narratives that feel true. That's what makes the lie so durable. It sounds like wisdom. Here are the phrases. You may recognize them. It's just a season. This is elegant. It borrows from the language of business cycles and natural systems. Seasons pass, things return. It implies awareness. I see this. I'm not ignoring it. I'm simply acknowledging the timing. But examine what it actually does. It converts a measurable decline into a temporary condition without evidence. It presupposes a future correction with no mechanism attached. There is no plan inside this sentence. There is no date. There is no metric. There is only the quiet comfort of impermanence. In business, you would never accept this from a direct report. Revenue is down. It's just a season. You would ask, what's the data? What's the data? What's the cause? What's the intervention? You don't ask yourself those questions here. Because asking the questions makes the situation real. I'm focused on growth right now. This is perhaps the most sophisticated deflection in the executive vocabulary, because it's true in every other context. You are focused on growth, that's legitimate. That's what you do. But watch how this phrase works in the health context specifically. It doesn't say health isn't important. It simply places something else first. It creates a cue. And here's what you need to understand about the cue. There's always something legitimate ahead of the thing you're avoiding. The cue never empties. There's always growth to focus on. I'm focused on growth right now is not a priority statement. It is a permanence mechanism with a temporary. Say it again. It's a permanence mechanism with a temporary disguise. This isn't my priority. At least this one is direct, honest in its form, if not its function. But here's what's interesting. In every domain, in every other domain, you have a standard. If something affects your performance, it becomes a priority. Full stop. You don't deprioritize capabilities that affect your output. You protect them. So when you say a physical health isn't your priority, you are implicitly claiming that your physical state doesn't affect your performance. You are saying the quality of my sleep, my energy, my cognitive function, my hormone levels, my cardiovascular capacity, none of this has material impact on my work or my decisions. Do you actually believe that? Or is it simply easier to say not a priority than to say I haven't started and I don't know why? I've earned the flexibility. This is their reward framing. And it's worth examining carefully because it contains something real. You worked hard. That's not nothing. Discipline has costs, and acknowledging that isn't weakness. But watch how the reward framing functions specifically in the health context. In every other domain, you understand that past performance doesn't protect future results. You don't coast on last year's revenue. You don't rest on a product that shipped well 2 years ago. You know that work has to continue. That maintenance is not laziness. It's discipline applied to sustainability. I've earned the flexibility, says. The rules that govern decline don't apply to me anymore. I've worked hard enough to exempt myself from biology. You haven't. No one has. I can dial it in any time. We'll come back to this one. Here's what's actually happening, and I want to be precise about this. Admitting physical decline, not discussing it abstractly, but genuinely reckoning with it, feels like something specific to high-performing men. It's not random discomfort. It has a shape. It feels like loss of control. Because you have spent 2 years building your capacity to control outcomes. That's not delusion, it's skill. You learn that discipline produces results, that you can will things into better state through effort and decision making. Physical decline disrupts that model. You can't negotiate with it. You can't acquire your way out of it. You can't hire it away. It happens on its own timeline with or without your consent. It feels like aging. Not aging as concept, aging as evidence. The body becomes a reminder system. And for someone who has built identity around sharp performance, the reminder is unwelcome. Every symptom, every limitation, every recovery takes longer than it used to. These are data points in a story you'd rather not read. It feels like erosion of dominance. Your edge is real. You spend years sharpening it. And for many of them, men in this audience, physical vitality isn't separate from that edge. It's part of it. It signals capability. It projects authority. To acknowledge decline is to acknowledge a gap between who you are now and who you were. And that gap is uncomfortable in a way that financial gaps, talent gaps, market gaps, none of those are. Because those gaps are outside of you, are outside you even. This one isn't. So the mind does what intelligent minds do when faced with an uncomfortable truth. It constructs a better narrative, a temporary narrative, a narrative that maintains the identity intact while the underlying condition continues. Success gave you leverage. It also gave you better excuses. The same intelligence that built the system built the blind spot. A less successful person doesn't say, I can dial it in any time. They don't have that. But you do. You have the track record, the resources, the discipline, the capability, and that becomes a justification for not acting now. The very things that make you capable of fixing it become the reason you don't have to yet. That's not an accident. That is architecture. Let me draw a distinction that I think is central to everything we've been discussing. In your professional life, you confront problems immediately. Not always perfectly, not always with the right solution in hand, but you engage. You look at bad numbers. You have the hard conversations. You commission the diagnostic. You bring in the right people. You do not look away. In health, you delay. A company can survive bad quarters. Identity doesn't tolerate bad mirrors. And I want to offer you a precise explanation for why, not a general one. In business, failure threatens your reputation. In health, failure threatens your identity. They're not the same thing. Reputation is external. It can be managed, rebuilt, reframed. Reputation is what others see. Identity is what you are. And when the threat is to what you are, not what you've built, not what others think, but what you fundamentally are, the psychological protection is different. Okay, my voice mixed up there. More aggressive, more sophisticated, more invisible. You've watched peers take significant professional hits and come back stronger. You've watched companies collapse and rebuild. You know reputation is recoverable. Professionals navigate that. But the erosion of physical capability, of vitality, of the specific quality of presence and power that you've associated with yourself, that's not framed as a recoverable situation. is framed as evidence, permanent evidence. Evidence about who you are now versus who you were. You will confront what cost you money. You will narrate what cost you pride. That's the operating system. Money is external. Pride is structural. And when something threatens the structural self-image, the identity of the man who is in control, who is vital, who is still at full capacity, the mind doesn't engage it directly. It writes around it. Excuses rarely sound like excuses to the man using them. Let's return to the last phrase, the most important one of all. I can dial it in any time. This is the final line of defense. It is not a plan. It is an insurance policy. As long as you believe you could act, that the capacity to correct exists, the current state feels chosen rather than inevitable, voluntary rather than structural, temporary rather than directional. But here's the question you haven't asked yourself with any rigor. If you could dial it in any time, why haven't you? Not rhetorically, structurally. What is the actual mechanism by which any time becomes now? What is the specific trigger? What does the before state look like versus the after state? When you've hit the dial-in point in the past, and you probably have earlier in life, what was different then? The phrase, I can dial it in any time, has never in the history of this conversation been followed by a plan. It exists to foreclose a conversation, not to open an action. It is a door that looks like it leads somewhere and opens onto a wall. If you could dial it in any time, you already would have. Short, cold, no cushioning. That's a sentence. Listen to it again if you need to. The capability argument and the behavior are in direct contradiction. You have the resources, you have the knowledge, you have in many cases people around you who have made the same changes you're describing as dialable. None of that has moved you. This is data, not about your capacity, about the story. So where does this leave us? Not with motivation. Motivation is downstream of belief, and belief is the problem. You don't need to want it more. You need to see it more accurately. 3 principles, briefly. Truth before comfort. The first action is diagnostic, not a program, not a commitment, not a lifestyle overhaul. A measurement, labs, a proper assessment, something external that can't be narrated away. You have been operating on a self-assessment, and the self-assessments run through the filter of all the language we just discussed. External measurements bypass the filter. You run your business on data. Run this the same way. Measurement before narrative. This is an extension of the first, but distinct. Before you decide what the numbers mean, before you contextualize, before you explain, before you compare to what you were 5 years ago, or what they might have been, what there might be once this season passes, you have to look at them cleanly without the framing engaged. The narrative follows the measurement. In this domain, for most of the men in this audience, that order has been reversed. The narrative exists before the measurement, sometimes instead of it. Action before identity repair. This is the one that most people miss. The instinct, once a pattern is visible, is to reconcile the identity first, to update the self-image before taking the step, to feel like the kind of person who prioritizes this before doing the thing. That's backwards. The identity doesn't update on intention, it updates on evidence. The action produces the evidence. Make the appointment, have the assessment done, engage with what the data says. The identity repair is a consequence of that consequence, not a prerequisite. One final thing. The men this show is built for, so to say it one more time, the men this show is built for are not soft. They have made difficult decisions. They have sustained effort over long periods. They have sat with uncertainty and kept moving. That's not nothing. This isn't a question of capacity. It's a question of where the capacity is being directed. And right now, for many of you, it is being directed at maintaining the story rather than changing the situation. The intelligence that built what you have is the same intelligence that has been protecting the narrative. That's not a character flaw. It's a mechanism. And mechanism can be directed. Mechanisms can be redirected, not directed. If the story protects you, it's costing you. That's all I got for you today. I hope this episode brought you value. If it did, make sure you share it with another leader, because as iron sharpeneth iron, one man sharpeneth another. Make sure you share the show and leave me a comment on, I already said that, didn't I? Make sure you leave me a positive, try again. Make sure you leave me a comment on iTunes if this episode brought you value, preferably a positive comment, or you can tell me how shitty my show is. No, I'm only joking. Follow me on my socials. I am on Facebook under Marwan Killu, LinkedIn Marwan Killu Fitness, and you can watch this on YouTube under Marwan Killu. And finally, make sure you subscribe to the show so you get notifications when new episodes go live. Right now, I'm doing 3 shows a week on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. And I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.